All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about a world of imperial purple, of poison, of emperors and assassins. This is a look at a period of history so brutal, so just filled with betrayal, that the man who chronicled it, he almost refused to write about it in the first place.
So that quote you're looking at, that comes from Edward Gibbon, the great historian of the Roman Empire. And I want you to just picture this for a second. This guy writes volumes on the glory of Rome, and then he gets to the Byzantine era, and he just hits a wall. He called it an ungrateful and melancholy task. I mean, basically, he saw it as this miserable, pointless story of decay that he felt had nothing to teach and, frankly, wasn't even a good story.
So you gotta ask, right? If it's so bleak, why even bother? Why did Gibbon force himself to write it? Well, he realized that hidden inside all of that decay was something absolutely vital. The fate of Byzantium, its slow, painful collapse, is directly connected to the rise of our modern world. Its fall helps explain the birth of new kingdoms and the revolutions that literally shaped our own time. To really understand why things rose, you have to understand what fell.
So, what was it that caused Gibbon so much despair? It wasn't just about the usual stuff, battles and borders. For him, it was something much deeper. It was about the decay of the human spirit itself.
For Gibbon, it all kind of boiled down to a tale of two citizens. On one hand, you've got the free man of ancient Athens. This is someone who dared to think for themselves, right? Their person and their property were guarded by equal laws. They had a vote in their own government. And then he looked at the subjects of Byzantium, and he saw the total opposite. A person lost in what he called a dead uniformity of abject vices, completely crushed by servitude so profound that it erased what it even meant to be an individual.
This right here, this was Gibbon's core diagnosis. He called it spiritual despotism. The Byzantines, he argued, were being crushed by a double yoke. So yeah, you had the political tyranny of the emperors, that's one part. But there was something worse. This spiritual despotism was a force that didn't just control what you did, it chained how you thought. It just destroyed a person's courage and their reason. And for Gibbon, that was the true source of the rot.
And what happens when the spirit of a people is broken like that? Well, their politics become a total blood sport. All of a sudden, the throne of Constantinople is the single most dangerous seat in the entire world.
I mean, just look at this timeline. This is what happened right after the death of the great emperor Heraclius. His son lasts just 103 days before he's dead, probably poisoned by his own stepmother, Martina. A few months later, she's overthrown. They cut out her tongue and cut off her son's nose so he's ineligible to rule. And the guy who replaced them, he eventually gets murdered in his bathtub by a servant. This isn't a transition of power, it's a maelstrom of violence.
And this is the justification a citizen gives for deposing Empress Martina. It's just a raw, completely unfiltered look at the political realities of the time. Power wasn't just about your bloodline, it was about the perception of strength. And any perceived weakness, like being a woman in this brutal world, was pretty much a death sentence. Now, if you want just one story that captures the absolute essence of this era, the cruelty, the resilience, and the spectacular thirst for vengeance, you have to look no further than the tale of Justinian II, the slit-nosed emperor.
So Justinian II was a young, cruel, and pretty foolish tyrant. After about 10 years, the people had simply had enough. They overthrew him, and while they spared his life, they cut off his nose and banished him to the edge of the known world. Now, by the logic of the day, his political career was over. A mutilated man could never be emperor again. Or so they thought. But Justinian's pride, his hope of getting back on that throne, it never died. Get this, while he's escaping his enemies, his ship is caught in a violent storm. A companion begs him to pray and vow to forgive his enemies if God spares him. And this quote, this was his reply. This wasn't a man seeking mercy. This was a man fueled by pure, unyielding revenge. And incredibly, he gets his chance. After a decade in exile, forging alliances, surviving assassins, he returns to Constantinople at the head of a barbarian army. And the city, already tired of its new rulers, just lets him in. The slit-nosed emperor was back on the throne. You just can't make this stuff up.
And his revenge was biblical. Literally. The two emperors who had ruled in his absence were dragged in chains to the hippodrome. Justinian then placed one foot on each of their necks and just watched the chariot races for an hour, all while the crowd roared this verse from the Psalms. It is just a chilling spectacle of power, piety, and punishment, all rolled into one.
But here's the wild part. Justinian, for all his cinematic flair, he wasn't an outlier.
He was just one single portrait in a horrifying gallery of tyrants.
So let's take this guy, Andronicus. Before he even got the throne, his life reads like some crazy adventure novel. He was a captive of the Turks, a serial prison escapee, the lover of multiple queens, a treasonous conspirator. He lived as an outlaw and then marched on the capital claiming he was the people's champion, there to save them all. What a resume. And of course, once he was on the throne, this savior showed his true colors. Just look at the scorecard. Compare him to another tyrant, Constantine V, a guy so bloodthirsty that his officials would literally present him with a plate of noses as a gift. Andronicus seized power by having the 14-year-old boy emperor strangled with a bowstring. But look at their fates. Cruelty begets cruelty. Andronicus was eventually handed to a mob, which spent 3 days torturing him to death. And these were his actual words. After watching the young Alexius II get strangled, Andronicus kicked the boy's corpse and shouted, "This insult." This wasn't just political necessity for him. It was personal, it was vicious, and it was unbelievably cruel. So after wading through all this, through centuries of bloodshed, what was Gibbon's final verdict? How did he make any sense of this parade of violent, short-lived rulers? Well, it really all comes down to this number, 60. 60 emperors in 600 years. You do the math, that's an average reign of just 10 years. A decade, that's it. This wasn't a stable monarchy. It was a revolving door of ambition and assassination. As Gibbon so perfectly put it, the grave is ever beside the throne. And this brings us to Gibbon's breathtaking conclusion. He argues that from the grand perspective of history, all these emperors who seemed so incredibly powerful, they're nothing. They are just 60 phantoms of kings, fleeting ghosts whose petty ambitions are completely dwarfed by the massive sweep of time. Which leaves us with this final, massive question. Think about it. The Roman Empire in its Eastern form lasted for over 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. It outlasted nearly every other ancient power. And yet, it vanished. Its mighty emperors are dust. So as we look back on these phantoms, it really forces us to ask, if an empire that powerful can last that long and still just disappear, what, in the long run, truly endures?
Welcome. Today we're diving into a really wild story, a kind of historical chain reaction that comes to us from the work of historian Edward Gibbon. It all starts with a holy war over art. And it shows how one single dispute about faith could actually lead to rebellion, the birth of a whole new kingdom, and even the crowning of a brand new emperor.
I mean, it sounds almost impossible, right? How on earth could a fight over paintings and statues totally redraw the map of Europe? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. We're going to see how this argument over religious images completely reshaped the political world.
All right, so let's set the scene. We're in the 8th century Byzantine Empire. Now remember, this is basically the Eastern Roman Empire, a huge Christian powerhouse. But it's kind of split. You've got the Greek-speaking East and the Latin-speaking West. And right in the middle of all this, a really, really fierce debate over sacred images is about to just explode. So the whole fight boiled down to two totally opposite views. On one side, you had the iconoclasts, literally the image breakers. They believed that all these religious pictures were basically idols and that this was a slippery slope back to paganism. But on the other side, you had the iconodules. And for them, these images weren't just pretty art. Now why? They were vital tools like windows to the divine that helped everyday people, many of whom couldn't read, connect with their faith.
And as Gibbon points out, this wasn't always the case. Early Christianity, coming from its Jewish roots, was super wary of images. But things change. Over hundreds of years, especially out in the East, pictures of Christ, Mary, and the saints became completely tangled up in everyday worship. They weren't just decorations anymore. People saw them as powerful protectors, even thought they could perform miracles.
Okay, so this is the flashpoint. In 726 AD, the Byzantine Emperor, Leo III, basically declares war on all religious images. Now, Leo wasn't some stuffy theologian. He was a tough military guy. He came from a part of the empire that bordered the Islamic world, which, had a very strict ban on images. Plus, he might have been looking for someone to blame for some recent military losses, thinking maybe this idolatry had made God angry. Whatever his reason, he issues this absolutely stunning order: get rid of all the pictures, cleanse the churches.
So the emperor's order sends just shockwaves across the Christian world. In the East, people weren't happy, but they kind of reluctantly started to go along with it. But in the West, Oh, it was met with absolute fury. And nowhere was that anger fiercer than in Rome. The Pope, Gregory II, wasn't having any of it, and he started preparing his response.
And the reaction was fast and it was violent. I mean, almost immediately, the Pope starts firing off these defiant letters. All across Italy, cities just erupt in revolt. People stop paying their taxes to the emperor, and they start tearing down his statues. In just a couple of years, the whole peninsula is in open rebellion, totally united behind the Pope and the cause of defending their holy images.
And just listen to the Pope's tone in this letter. This is so much more than a religious argument. He's making a direct political threat. He's basically telling the emperor, hey, you think we need you? We don't. And when he mentions the Lombards, who were enemies of the empire, that's not an accident. He's saying we can find other friends, other protectors. This is basically a declaration of independence.
And it turns out Pope Gregory's warning was spot on. By standing up to the Byzantine emperor, Rome had pretty much cut itself loose. But that created a huge new problem. Now the city was vulnerable, especially to its old enemies, right there in Italy, the Lombards. And they saw this as the perfect chance to move in and take over everything.
So you've got the Lombards at the gates, demanding Rome's surrender, and the Byzantine emperor is powerless to help. So the Pope does something nobody saw coming. He actually leaves Italy and makes this incredibly dangerous journey across the Alps. Where's he going? To the kingdom of the Franks, this up-and-coming Germanic power. And let me tell you, this one desperate trip is about to change the map of Europe forever.
And here is the absolute game changer. The Frankish king Pepin, he answers the Pope's call for help. He marches his army down into Italy, and he just crushes the Lombards. But, and this is the crucial part, he doesn't give the land back to the Byzantine emperor. Nope, he donates it directly to the Pope. And just like that, the Papal States are born. For the first time ever, the Pope is not just a spiritual leader, he's a king with his own kingdom, one that would last for more than 1,000 years. So, this new alliance between the popes and the Frankish kings, it only gets stronger under Pepin's son. And this guy, well, his military skill and his sheer ambition were about to make him a legend. We're talking about Charlotte the Great, better known as Charlemagne.
Okay, so fast forward to Christmas Day in the year 800. This is the day when everything comes to a head. The bond between the Pope's spiritual power and the Franks' military power is about to have its most dramatic moment yet. This one day is going to formally break the West away from the East for good.
So picture this. Charlemagne, who is now easily the most powerful man in Europe, is in Rome. It's Christmas morning, he's in St. Peter's Basilica, kneeling down to pray, and right then, Pope Leo III makes this incredibly bold and supposedly completely surprising move.
And this is the climax of the whole story. The Pope takes this beautiful, precious crown, and he places it right on Charlemagne's head as he's kneeling there. Instantly, the whole crowd just erupts, hailing him as the new Roman emperor. And it's interesting, Gibbon suggests the crowd might have been just a little bit coached for this moment.
So, was Charlemagne really caught off guard? He claimed later that he had no idea it was coming. But Gibbon and a lot of historians are, let's say, a little skeptical. Was it a genuine surprise? Or was this just the most brilliant piece of political theater of the century? I mean, think about it. The deal was perfect. The Pope gets a powerful protector and proves he has the authority to make emperors. And Charlemagne, he gets the ultimate prize, the title of Roman Emperor, backed by God.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What's the lasting impact of this one moment on Christmas Day? Let's wrap things up by looking at how this whole chain of events, all started by a fight over pictures, literally forged a new Western world.
The fallout from this was just massive. First, the political connection between Rome in the West and Constantinople in the East is broken, permanently. Second, a whole new Western Roman Empire is born, what we'd later call the Holy Roman Empire, with its power base now in France and Germany, not the Mediterranean. And third, the Pope is now a kingmaker. He goes from being a subject of the old emperor to the guy who claims the authority to crown new ones. The entire political and religious map of Europe was redefined, and it would stay that way for 1,000 years.
So, when you boil it all down, Gibbon's work here shows us how a debate that seems really abstract, a fight over religious ideas, can have very real, world-changing political consequences. A war over art literally tore one empire apart and created a new one in its place. And that kind of leaves you wondering, right? What conflicts over ideas or beliefs are happening right now, quietly shaping the world map of our future?
All right, today we're journeying back to the 18th century to dig into one of history's most powerful and, yeah, controversial accounts of the rise of Islam, all through the eyes of the legendary historian Edward Gibbon. And our story kicks off with a line that, centuries later, still has so much power.
So Gibbon doesn't ease you in. Nope. He hits you with this thunderclap of a sentence right from the start. It's so dramatic, it's provocative, and it immediately tells you we're talking about something on a massive scale. For Gibbon, this isn't just about the birth of a religion. It's a full-blown revolution that's going to go head-to-head with the world's greatest empires. Now, Gibbon's whole argument starts here. To really get the man, you have to understand the land that made him. He takes us right to the Arabian Peninsula, a place of really stark, really dramatic extremes, which, as you'll see, created a certain kind of person.
So Gibbon paints this incredible picture, right? It's all about contrasts. On the one hand, you've got what he calls stony and sandy Arabia, this dreary waste. I mean, he describes whole caravans just getting lost, buried in sandstorms. But then, on the other hand, there's happy Arabia, this almost mythical earthly paradise that's overflowing with frankincense and spices, the stuff that brought merchants from all over the known world.
And who lived here? The Bedouins. And Gibbon sees them as total masters of this tough landscape. They weren't just farmers. He says they acquired absolute possession of the horse and camel. You know, this dangerous, difficult life created a people with incredible courage and a fierce, fierce love of their own independence. But here's the key thing Gibbon points out. They all shared a language, a culture, but they were constantly at war with each other, torn apart by tribal feuds. They were a people just waiting for something or someone to unite them.
So, it's right into this world, a world of desert warriors and rich merchants, of feuding tribes and ancient beliefs. That's where our central figure is born, Muhammad of Mecca.
Now, Gibbon just throws out what he calls unskillful calumny, basically clumsy slander, that Muhammad came from nothing. No, he makes it very clear he was born into the Quraysh, the most powerful tribe in Mecca, the guardians of their most sacred site, the Kaaba. His marriage to the rich widow Khadijah made him financially secure, and for years he was just a respected merchant. But then, in his 40th year, he goes on a retreat to a cave on Mount Hira, and everything changes. So what was the message he came back with? Well, Gibbon boils the faith of Islam down to this single, incredibly powerful creed. He says it's made of two parts. First, an eternal truth. There is only one God. A very stark, uncompromising idea, especially when you think about the 360 idols back at the Kaaba. And second, what he calls a necessary fiction, that Muhammad himself is the apostle of that God.
You can probably guess this new message didn't go over too well. The leaders of Mecca, his own relatives, saw him as a huge threat to their power, their traditions, and frankly, the money they made from pilgrimages. They leaned on his uncle, Abu Talib, to shut him up. And this quote, this was his answer, an absolute ironclad statement of his belief.
And that conviction? Oh, it was about to be tested like never before. Because that pressure, it turned into outright persecution, and it forced a decision that would turn a preacher into the founder of an empire. Okay, so things in Mecca get really desperate really fast. The Quraysh put a total ban on his family, no trade, no contact. They laid siege to him and his followers. And then he suffers this terrible double blow. His protector, Abu Talib, dies, and so does his wife, Khadijah. Suddenly he's vulnerable, and his enemies see their opening. They hatched this plot where a man from every major tribe would kill him all at once. That way the blame would be shared, and no single clan could seek revenge.
He gets word of the plot and has to escape in the middle of the night with his friend Abu Bakr. For 3 days, they hide out in this cave while search parties are all over the place. Gibbon tells this incredible story. Their pursuers are right at the mouth of the cave, and a terrified Abu Bakr whispers, "We are only 2." But Muhammad's reply is just pure faith. There is a third. It is God himself. This incredible escape, this flight from Mecca to Medina, is known as the Hijra. It's such a massive event that it marks year 1 of the Islamic calendar. But for Gibbon, the historian, it's something even more. He calls it the first vital spark of a new empire. Why? Because this is the moment the prophet gets a state. And just think about how fast this all happens. He shows up in Medina as a fugitive, an outcast. But the city's tired of its own internal fighting, so they welcome him as their leader. And just like that, he's not just a preacher anymore. Now he's a ruler, a judge, a general. He holds both political and religious power. His word is basically law.
So, having this new authority, it completely changes the mission. Gibbon points out that the prophet's revelations start to get a fiercer and more sanguinary tone. Persuasion had its chance. Now, the command was to spread the faith by the sword.
The first big test comes at the Battle of Badr. And get this, his force was just this small group of followers, not well armed, going up against a much bigger army from Mecca. There were only 313 of them. Their victory was a total shock, and for believers, it was seen as proof that God was on their side. Now, you fast forward just a few years, and that tiny group, it's now an army of 10,000. This number isn't just about military might. For Gibbon, this shows the unification of all those warring Arabian tribes, now all under one single flag.
This all leads to the big climax, the fall of Mecca. The very city that kicked him out is now completely at his mercy. And he's standing before the leaders of the Quraysh, the same men who tried to have him killed. And instead of revenge, he shows this incredible mercy. As Gibbon notes, these words probably did more to win over the city than any battle ever could have.
So, he's done it. He's unified Arabia under one leader and one faith. But the final chapter of his life brings a question that would just tear his new empire apart. Who comes next? Then, in the year 632, after a short illness, Mahomet dies. He leaves behind this unified Arabia, a powerful new religion, but, and this is key to Gibbon's telling, he never officially named a successor. And with him gone, a massive power vacuum opens up instantly. Okay, so this table really breaks down what Gibbon saw as the crisis that followed. You see the first four caliphs and the conflict just building. You have figures like Abu Bakr and Omar who were chosen by the group to keep things from falling apart. But then there's Ali, the prophet's cousin and son-in-law, who a lot of people felt was the rightful heir. You can see he gets passed over again and again until he finally gets the top job, only for his rule to be swallowed by a civil war. For Gibbon, this initial political fight is the very beginning of the great split between Sunni and Shia Islam that exists to this day. So, what's Gibbon's final take on Muhammad himself? Well, he doesn't give a simple answer. He doesn't paint him as just a hero or a villain. He sees him as this deeply complex figure. He kind of wonders if a genuine spiritual enthusiasm could, under all that pressure of leadership, just slide into imposture. For Gibbon, that line between believing something yourself and making others believe it, it's perilous and slippery. So, in the end, Gibbon kind of lays out all the evidence and then steps back, leaving the final call to us. He debates the enthusiast versus the imposter, but what his history really leaves us with is a much, much bigger question, one that still echoes today. How on earth did the vision of one single man from the deserts of Arabia end up permanently changing the faith and the fate of entire nations?
Today we're jumping into one of history's most incredible comeback stories, all through the eyes of the legendary historian Edward Gibbon. It's a wild tale of how a world-changing empire, right on the day its founder died, was staring into the abyss of total collapse, only to rocket out of the ashes with a speed that is just, well, unbelievable. So picture this. It's the year 632 AD. The Prophet Muhammad is dead. And in the words of Edward Gibbon, everything he'd built tottered. Now we're not talking about a few cracks here. The whole building was about to come down. This union of Arab tribes was so new, their loyalty was paper thin. So you have to wonder, right? Was this it? Was this whole revolutionary movement just going to be a flash in the pan? A tiny footnote in the history books? Honestly, it really looked that way. When a charismatic leader dies, so often the movement dies right along with them. And if you dig into Gibbon's account, the reasons for this near-total meltdown were deep, and there were a lot of them. This wasn't just a simple political crisis. No. It was a crisis of faith, of culture, of identity, all exploding at the very same moment.
Gibbon really lays out the chaos. First off, a lot of the brand new converts were already having buyer's remorse, missing their old ways. Then you had these ancient tribal feuds that had been papered over, well, they came roaring right back to life. People were getting really fed up with the new rules like no wine and fasting. And those religious tithes, they started to feel less like a holy offering and a lot more like a humiliating tax. And to top it all off, you had rival prophets popping up all over the place saying, hey, I've got a direct line to the divine too. It was absolute chaos.
So, how on earth do you pull a society back from that kind of total fragmentation? The new leader, the first caliph, Abu Bakr, was facing what Gibbon calls a massive apostasy. And his response? It wasn't to sit down and talk it out. It was a swift, brutal military campaign to literally force the splintered tribes back into line.
The #1 challenger was this guy, Moslama. And he wasn't some minor player. This man saw himself as an equal to Mahomet. I mean, he had the incredible nerve to actually offer to split the world with him. So after Mahomet's death, Moslama's power just ballooned, and he became the main rallying point for all the rebel tribes.
To deal with this massive threat, and it was an existential threat, Abu Bakr's top general, Khalid, didn't just put together a small posse. No, he gathered an army of 40,000 men. This wasn't going to be a little skirmish. This was a war for the very soul of their new nation. And the final showdown was absolutely brutal. Gibbon tells us that Khalid's army was actually pushed back in the first assault, losing 1,200 soldiers. But Khalid was a brilliant commander. He managed to rally his men, turn the whole thing around, and that battle became the fiery, bloody crucible where the new state was truly forged. But the price of that unity was just staggering. In the final slaughter, 10,000 rebels were killed. Musaylama himself was cut down. The rebellion was utterly crushed, and the tribes were united again. But this time, as Gibbon points out, it was a unity sealed in fire and blood. Okay, but here's the thing. Military power was only half the story. Gibbon argues that what happened next was maybe even more important. The character of the first caliphs, the guys who came next, was so different from any other rulers on the planet, and that became their secret weapon. Gibbon paints this really stark contrast. You have the kings of Persia and the emperors of Rome living in what he calls vain magnificence. And then you had the caliphs, who practiced this deep, simple austerity. Their power wasn't about fancy palaces and luxury. It was built on a reputation for justice, for prayer, for personal integrity. They weren't just kings, they were true leaders. I mean, just take a look at the second caliph, Omar, the man who oversaw this massive first wave of expansion. His daily meal? Barley bread or some dates. His drink? Water. He'd preached in a gown that was supposedly torn in 12 places. Get this. When a Persian governor traveled to meet him, he didn't find Omar in some grand palace. He found him asleep on the steps of the mosque, right there with the beggars. And this wasn't just him being eccentric. This was the whole culture of their leadership. This radical humility set a standard so powerful that even the guy who came after him basically said, there's no way I can live up to that. As Gibbon puts it, it was a government with the speed of a dictatorship, but the frugal values of a republic.
Okay, so you have a people forged together by war, led by men known for their incredible simplicity and justice. That combination, well, it created this restless, unified, and unbelievably motivated force that was about to be unleashed on the rest of the world. The expansion that happened next is almost hard to wrap your head around. During the 10-year rule of that same humble Caliph Omar, his armies conquered 36,000 cities or castles. Just think about that number. It shows you the insane speed of their conquest. The path here is just breathtaking. In 632, the whole thing is about to blink out of existence. Just over a decade later, the huge empires of Persia, Roman Syria, and Egypt are all gone. And in a single century, their empire stretches all the way from India to the coast of Spain. The old world powers just fell like dominoes. First, Persia. Then, Syria. Then, Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world. And from there, the wave just kept going, sweeping across North Africa and crashing into Spain. It was a redrawing of the world map at a scale and a speed that had rarely, if ever, been seen before. So why? How did this happen? Gibbon gives us a two-part answer. First, he gives huge credit to the spirit of the nation, this new, explosive, unified energy. But he's also really clear that it was only possible because of the weakness of their enemies. In his view, the great Roman and Persian empires were just shadows of their former selves, exhausted and rotting from the inside, basically ripe for the picking. And all of this brings us to a really fascinating final point. Because after telling this epic story of conquest and unity, Gibbon, the master historian himself, kind of pulls back the curtain and reflects on his own work and on the very nature of the story he's just told us. He basically admits that his own sources are flawed. He calls them his blind and insufficient guides. And why? Well, because the earliest Arab histories he could find were written down more than 100 years after all this happened, based mostly on stories passed down. And the other sources? They were from the Greeks, who, as Gibbon so dryly puts it, weren't exactly anxious to celebrate the triumphs of their enemies.
And that leaves us with a really important question to chew on. Gibbon's given us this incredible, powerful story of how an empire rose from the dead. But he also reminds us that every single history book we read is filtered through the biases, the agendas, and the blind spots of the people who wrote it. It really forces you to ask, how much of history is about what actually happened, and how much is about who gets to tell the story? It's something to think about, not just for this story, but for any story from the past.